again, welcome back to the channel and to part 3 of my Learning to Leyn series. This is the third video of a series of videos where I'm going over the different tropes for the Torah laning, and specifically in the Ashkenazi trope that's followed in the Binder book. In this week's video, we're going to go over the Telisha Gdola, the Telisha Ktana, the Pazer, the Zakef Gadol, and the Yetiv. So let's get started. We're going to begin today's video with the Telisha Gdola and the Telisha Ktana formulas. What is the Telisha Gdola and Telisha Ktana? These are two different marks that both appear on their own, that look very similar, and also sound very similar. But there are a few key differences that will help you know the difference between the two of them. So, what does the Telisha Gdola look like? The Telisha Gdola looks like a little tiny magnifying glass that is tilted upward and to the right. The Telisha Ktana looks like a tilted magnifying glass that is tilted upward and to the left. How do you tell the difference between the two Telishas? Because they won't always be tilted in that way. The Telisha Gdola will always be above the first letter of the word. Meanwhile, the Telisha Ktana will always appear above the last letter of the word. In that sense, they're both very similar to the Pashta, which does not appear on the syllable, but on the last letter. So, does this matter? It does, because most Hebrew words, like I mentioned in the Hebrew pronunciation primer video, most Hebrew words, their emphasis is on the second to last or last syllable. What does this mean when you are looking at a tikkun? It means that just like the Pashta, if the syllable is not on the word that is supposed to have the mark, you're going to have a double. In this case, it wouldn't be a double Pashta, but a double Telisha Gdola, or a double Telisha Ktana. So that is what they look like. What do they sound like? The Telisha Gdola sounds like this. Munach Telisha Gdola. That is the Telisha Gdola. It goes up by 5, and then it goes right back down, missing a few notes. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 2, 1. You're starting and you're ending in the same place. How is that similar to the Telisha Ktana? Well, the Telisha Ktana, just like the Telisha Gdola, starts in the same place and it ends in the same place. It also starts and ends on the same note. However, it doesn't go nearly as high. In fact, you're kind of staying in the same place, but you're scooping below a little and you're going above a little before ending up where you started. So this is what the Telisha Ktana sounds like. Munach Telisha Ktana. That is the Telisha Ktana. You're starting below, going back, above, returning to the starting point. And that is the difference between the Telisha Gdola and the Telisha Ktana. Both of these formulas are formulas that are standalone, but each also has their own kind of pattern. The Telisha Gdola tends to appear at the beginning of a clause. So whether that's the beginning of a verse or right after the etnachta, that's usually where you're going to find the Telisha Gdola. On the other hand, the Telisha Ktana is a bit more fluid. It has a bit more freedom of where it ends up. There's often a pattern that happens with 3 marks in sequence. I'm not saying this happens all the time, but the Telisha Ktana is often followed by a kadma ve'azla, which is often followed by a reviya. So what does that sound like? It sounds like this. Telisha Ktana, kadma ve'azla, reviya. That particular sequence shows up all the time in the Torah. I just thought this was fun to share. If you guys see it, you'll know this is normal. Unfortunately, Both the Telisha Gdola and the Telisha Ktana are not present in the first Shema paragraph. So how do you practice? Well, beyond the numbers, at this point, I do recommend just picking a parsha of your choice and just flipping through the Chumash and finding a verse that has this and practicing like that. And that is the Telisha Gdola and the Telisha Ktana formulas. So now we've done the Telisha Gdola and we've done the Telisha Ktana. What's next? What's next is the Pazer formula. What is the Pazer formula? The Pazer is its own thing. So what does it look like? The Pazer appears above the word, and it appears on the syllable that the meat is happening on. It's not always on the first letter, not always on the last letter. And it looks like an H, a lowercase h that's been flipped vertically. It's upside down. That's what it looks like. What does it sound like? Just like the Telisha Gdola, we are going to go high with the Pazer, but we're going to go a bit higher than the Telisha Gdola because this is a fancy one. This is a very, very fancy one, and we're not going to go back down all the way to what feels like a very strong place. There's almost a little bit of a lack of resolution, a questioning at the end of it. So what does it sound like? It sounds like this. Munach Pazer. So that is the Pazer. As you can see, there's a lot going on. But if we break it down, it should be easy for us to do. So how do we break it down? Well, I'm going to go back to the number trick because I believe that this is the best way of practicing it. We start at 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's part 1, right? Then we continue on with the second part, which is the 6, 5, 3, 2. So let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2. And keep in mind that this is all in the major scale. So how do you practice? Basically doing those numbers. As far as I'm aware, there's no pop melody that does this exact pattern, but once you get the numbers, it's easier than you think. Unfortunately, for this particular formula also, there is no Shema equivalent. So once you get used to doing Pazer, I recommend, again, just flipping the page, and if you're lucky enough to find a Pazer in your Chumash, just do it. That's all we need to know about the Pazer. We're moving on to the next formula on our list for the trope, and that is the Zakef Gadol formula. The Zakef Gadol and the Zakef Katon formula are actually really similar, both in how they look and in how they sound. The Zakef Katon formula looks like a colon above the word. The Zakef Gadol, on the other hand, looks like a colon above the word, but with a vertical line right next to it to the left. So why are they so similar looking? That's because the Zakef Katan and the Zakef Gadol are functionally serving the same purpose. Whenever you have more clauses within a verse, these clauses, unless you have extra stuff for flavor, like the Revi'i or the Telisha or the Kadma ve'Azla, almost all of these clauses will be separated by a Zakef Katan formula, unless it's the halfway point, in which case it's an en achta. The Zakef Gadol formula is done when you're supposed to have a Zakef Katan formula, but there's only one word in the clause. And that's why you'll often see it just on its own before an et nachta formula, or on its own before a sof pasuk formula, or right after a Zakef Katan formula. What do they sound like? Well, if you remember from the first video, a Zakef Katan sounds like this. Zakef Katan. Very simple, right? The Zakef Gadol sounds a little bit more fancy, It actually, in many ways, sounds similar to a Pazer, but it is more linked to the Zakef Katan. So what does it sound like? The Zakef Gadol sounds like this. Zakef Gadol. So just like the Zakef Katan, the Zakef Gadol ends in the same place, and it starts in the same place. But it is closer to Pazer in the melody than it is to a Zakef Katan. What do I mean by this? Well, if we remember, the Pazer goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2. The Zakef Gadol goes 1, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2. The Pazer does the whole thing. Goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Zakef Gadol skips. It just goes 1, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2. It's almost completely mirrored, but it ends on a 2 instead of a 1. So how do you practice? I recommend the numbers, as always. Once you familiarize yourself with the melody and with the name of the mark itself, as always, check the Chumash and go to a random parsha and go from there. I think in this case, there is a particular parsha that I would recommend for practicing the Zakef Gadol in particular, the second aliyah of Parsha Pinchas. Why? Because that is a census chapter. And in this particular census, the Zakef Gadol appears a lot. And so you'll definitely get used to saying the Zakef Gadol if you look at this particular section of the Torah. Anyways, that's the Zakef Gadol. We're going to move on to our final formula for this video. So the final formula that we're going to look at for today is the Yetiv formula. What is the Yetiv formula? The Yetiv looks exactly like a mapach. It looks like a less than math symbol below the word. But, and I can't stress this enough, a Yetiv is not a mapach. So how can you tell the difference between a Yetiv and a mapach? Well, a mapach, the symbol will appear right underneath the syllable where you make the melodic move. Whereas the Yetiv, the symbol always appears next to the first letter of the word. Not only that, a mapach always shows up right before a pashta. Meanwhile, a Yetiv always shows up before the munach katan, or just the Zakef Katan. So, what does it sound like? The Yetiv sounds like this. Yetiv. That's it. So what's the difference between a Yetiv and a mapach? I will demonstrate by going through both the mapach formula and the Yetiv formula. The mapach formula sounds like this. Mapach pashta munach katon. Meanwhile, the Yetiv formula sounds like this. Yetiv munach katon. There's a clear difference. The mapach goes down. The Yetiv starts high. Why does it do this? I don't know, but the Yetiv is kind of almost like a small interjection. So how should you practice this? Like all of the previous examples, the Chumash, because unfortunately, there is no Shema example for this one either. And that is the Yetiv formula. So we've reached the end of today's video. I know it's very short, but we're reaching the end point. Really after this, we have one more standard formula and the rest are all super duper duper rare. So I hope that you've taken the time to look at the previous videos and to continue practicing. How do you progress? I'd recommend, again, always going through the Chumash. You know almost all of the formulas at this point. So you can open a tikkun or you can open your Chumash and just kind of slowly parse it out. If you want, pick a parsha of your choice. Let's say your bar mitzvah parsha was Lech Lecha. Open the first page of Lech Lecha and just go slowly, one verse at a time. It'll become easier over time. You'll kind of learn it. The other thing that I am going to suggest in terms of helping to internalize the melodies on their own, I always find it fun to just improvise on them in English. So what does that mean? My plan is to do groceries today, and I plan to go to Trader Joe's to go get my groceries for breakfast today. I took the bus to Trader Joe's, and they had exactly what I want. So I went to the cashier to pay for my items, and then I realized I left my gift card at home. That is just a small example of me taking the trope and kind of applying it in English. If you have a certain feeling about the melodies that you are practicing, and you have a poem or a joke or something that it won't leave your head. It's an earworm of a joke or an earworm of a poem. Apply the melody to that so that the melody itself also becomes an earworm, and you should internalize it further. So you can take these melodies all the way. You don't have to stick to just the chumash. You don't need to stick to just the booklet. You can really do whatever you want with them. Obviously, they have a sacred kind of history, but do whatever you need to do to go ahead and internalize them, because that's the first step to truly practicing and learning from the Torah. Really, there's 3 parts to learning the Torah. You need to know how to read Hebrew, you need to know the melodies, and you need to have a good system for memorization, because ultimately those are the 3 things that will get you through. That was my last bit of advice for today's video. I hope that everyone gets something out of it. As always, keep practicing. B'hatzlacha, good luck. If you've been enjoying this series, please subscribe to the channel. We're going to conclude our laning series for the Ashkenazi Torah trope next week. Bye.